1492, Christopher Columbus sailed west from Spain. He was looking for a new route to Asia. Instead, he landed on islands in the Caribbean Sea. Columbus thought he had reached India. He called the native people he met Indians. This was a mistake, but it is a name that stuck. Columbus's voyage was a turning point in history. It opened up the Americas to Europe. This new world was full of resources and possibilities. However, it was also home to millions of people. These people had their own cultures and ways of life. Columbus's arrival marked the beginning of a new era. It was an era of exploration, conquest, and colonization. It was also an era of great tragedy for the indigenous people of the Americas. Columbus's voyages were funded by the Spanish crown. He returned to Spain with stories of gold and riches. This sparked a wave of Spanish exploration and colonization. The Spanish were eager to claim these new lands and exploit their resources.
After Columbus's initial voyage, Spain wasted no time establishing a presence in the Caribbean. They built settlements on the islands of Hispaniola, present-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and Cuba. These colonies were primarily focused on extracting resources. Gold was the most sought-after treasure, but the Spanish also established sugar plantations. The Spanish crown granted conquistadors the right to conquer and govern new lands. This system, known as the encomienda system, gave Spanish colonists control over the native population. The indigenous people were forced to work in mines and on plantations. This system was incredibly brutal and led to the deaths of countless natives.
The establishment of these colonies marked the beginning of European colonization in the Americas. It was a pattern that would be repeated by other European powers in the centuries to come. The quest for land, resources, and wealth drove the colonization of the Americas. This had a profound impact on the course of world history.
The arrival of the Spanish had a devastating impact on the indigenous populations of the Americas. The Spanish brought with them diseases to which the native people had no immunity. Smallpox, measles, and influenza ripped through native communities, killing millions. Beyond disease, the Spanish conquest brought violence, enslavement, and the destruction of native cultures. The Spanish, with their superior weapons and horses, easily conquered native populations. They forced them to convert to Christianity and abandon their traditional ways of life. The forced labor, disease, and violence of the Spanish conquest resulted in a demographic catastrophe. The native population of the Americas plummeted. Some estimates say that 90% of the indigenous population perished within a century of Columbus's arrival.
Section 4. A forced journey, the slave trade begins. As the indigenous population dwindled, the Spanish needed a new source of labor for their plantations and mines. They turned to Africa, initiating the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic in horrific conditions. The transatlantic slave trade was a brutal and dehumanizing system. Africans were treated as commodities, bought and sold like property. The journey across the Atlantic, known as the Middle Passage, was horrific. Many Africans died from disease, starvation, or despair. The slave trade had a profound impact on both Africa and the Americas. It led to the forced migration of millions of Africans. This had a lasting impact on the demographics, culture, and economy of the Americas.
Section 5. Conquistadors, the Fall of Empires. Driven by a thirst for gold and glory, Spanish conquistadors ventured deep into the American continents. Hernán Cortés, perhaps the most famous conquistador, landed in Mexico in 1519. He led a small army that conquered the mighty Aztec Empire. Cortés and his men exploited divisions within the Aztec Empire. They made alliances with indigenous groups who resented Aztec rule. Despite being vastly outnumbered, the Spanish, with their guns, horses, and steel weapons, defeated the Aztecs. They captured the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, in 1521. The conquest of the Aztecs was a turning point in the Spanish conquest of the Americas. It demonstrated the power of Spanish military technology and tactics against even the most formidable indigenous empires. The fall of the Aztecs paved the way for further Spanish expansion and conquest. This led to the establishment of a vast Spanish empire in the Americas.
Section 6. A world transformed, the legacy of Columbus. Columbus's voyages marked a turning point in world history. They ushered in an era of European exploration, conquest, and colonization. This had a profound impact on the Americas, Europe, and Africa. The establishment of European colonies in the Americas led to the exploitation of the continent's resources and people. The transatlantic slave trade had a devastating impact on Africa, uprooting millions of people and tearing apart families and communities. The exchange of goods, plants, and animals between the Americas and Europe, known as the Columbian Exchange, transformed diets and agriculture on both sides of the Atlantic. The events that unfolded after Columbus's voyages shaped the course of history. They led to the rise of global empires, the transatlantic slave trade, and the exchange of goods and ideas between continents. The legacy of Columbus is a complex one, marked by both the triumphs and tragedies that accompanied the discovery and conquest of the Americas.